Good morning. How about now? Can you hear me now? And now I have no camera. Okay. Can you guys hear me now? It looks like you can because my the little there we go. And for some reason now I have no camera. This is unreal. Let's just see. I don't know. We might have to do this without a camera this morning, guys. I apologize for that. I just had this camera working. It's not my. It's not the. Hey, Joshua, how you doing, man? Yeah, the camera's not going to work, so I don't have the time to sit here and troubleshoot it. I don't want to waste everybody's time today. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to quickly talk um, about insurance, and we're not going to discuss insurance as it relates to necessarily. We're not going to get into the weeds on the creative deals. Maybe you guys can hear my dog in the background, panting in the background. He needs some family time this morning. But anyway, I want to talk about a little bit about insurance and the types of insurance that we need, and just to make sure you guys have really just have your bases covered when it comes to properly insuring properties. And so, well, before we do that, obviously, if you guys, I know this is really, I feel kind of weird talking into nothing. I can't really see anything here, but um, if you guys wouldn't mind, go ahead and do that whole like, subscribe, notification bell. You know the deal. Many of you are probably on here because you've already done that. I realize that, but if you haven't joined us before, head over to YouTube. We're doing this live on YouTube right now, and we'd really appreciate the support. All right, so I'm going to run through this kind of quick, but feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat. I will check the chat. I have a little checklist I kind of want to go through here. So first thing I want to say about insurance is let's make sure that you are buying the right type of policy for the activity that you're doing. So, what I mean by that, so we have a couple of different activities. So if you're if you're a house flipper or a rehabber, obviously there's an insurance policy built just for your specific niche. All right, and if you are a landlord, a buy and hold investor, there are other policies that can be specifically built for you. But I want to talk about the rehabbers. If you guys are out there rehabbing houses, or if you're fixing up houses, then maybe later you're turning them into rentals, or you're doing seller finance deals. The very first type of policy that needs to be in place, and this is either by if you are your own general contractor or if you're hiring a general contractor, you got to have a general liability policy that is purchased and billed yearly. So it's going to be annualized. So you buy the policy and it's good for a year, right? And what this does, it's going to protect you or your contractor against claims of property damage, bodily injury, or what we call advertising injury, which is something I'm not going to get into here because I've never seen a claim for advertising injury. Maybe some of you have, but it has to do with it has more to do with what's the word I'm looking for? More like libel and things that aren't necessarily you would think are related to the job site. It has to do more with libel. Um, but so your general liability policy is going to protect against property damage, bodily injury, and advertising injury for you know whatever that's worth. But it's going to be on someone else's property. So if you're hiring a general contractor to come and do work for you, it would be very wise for you to require them to have a general liability policy. If they're going to be doing work for you on your property, this is going to protect. It's going to protect them, and it's going to protect you against property damage and bodily injury. All right, so This type of policy is going to follow your general contractor or yourself from site to site. So, like I said, it's a policy that covers you for the year, and it's going to follow you from site to site. One example of this might be that one of your contractors, or maybe an employee or a subcontractor, maybe they leave nails laying all over the yard or something like that, and someone from the neighborhood or even one of the subs steps on one of those nails. This policy, actually, it's not going to be a sub. It's not going to be an employee. This would cover a business owner for if somebody outside of the business comes in and injures himself, and the other. So what I'm talking about, if a sub were to step on a nail or something like that, that would be covered under workers' comp. But this could be like a local neighborhood kid that accidentally stumbles across the yard and steps on a nail. So that's just one small example of what a general liability policy would cover. There's many more. So I'm really just narrowing it down to bare minimum here. But what the general liability policy does not cover is bodily injury to employees or damage to employees or contractors' own property or tools. So it's not going to cover those things. It's in place strictly to protect against claims of property damage or bodily injury outside of the business. So it's protecting the business. And so, like I said, if an employee or a subcontractor is injured, this is where workers' comp is going to come in. We have all kinds of different insurance for. If you're in this business, you're dealing with and especially if you're doing rehabs, you're dealing with 4 different types of policies here. So the insurance business is not hurting at all. So we've got our general liability policy. It's going to cover, like I said, year to year. It's going to cover annually. Then we have our builder's risk policy, which is something that many of your contractors do not purchase. However, you can purchase a builder's risk policy for that particular project, and I would highly recommend that you do, because here's what it is to protect the job site and building materials. So things like vandalism, theft of building materials, destruction of building materials, things like that. Things that are non-human related. They're the materials and the requirements needed to complete the job. Now, this policy, let me make sure I've got no questions here. Okay, there we go. The builder's risk policy is written on a per job basis. So this is not something that you go by and it follows you from job site to job site. It is literally, you purchase it for that specific job, and that's all that this policy is going to cover. Once that job is completed, that policy is null and void. And once final payment is made to your contractors, that's it. This policy disappears. All right. Like I said, it's gonna protect the job site and building materials. It is going to cover damages only to property owned by the policy holder. So if you are buying materials and you're storing them at the job site if that's your job in this particular rehab, maybe you're an owner and you've purchased all these materials. Well, if those materials are stored at the job site, this builder's risk policy is only going to cover the materials that you purchased. It will not cover any materials that your contractor purchased. So it's going to depend. That's something you need to work out ahead of time. Is your contractor going to be buying the materials, or are you going to be buying the materials? For us, we have our contractor buy the materials. So he has to get the builder's risk policy. Now, we may pay for that policy, but the policy has to be written in his name because he's going out and purchasing all the materials. Some of these, there are some other builder's risk policies, by the way, that also cover property damaged owned by others while it's located at the site. So make sure you shop around. It might be that maybe you are purchasing you're purchasing partial materials, your contractor's purchasing the other materials. Some policies can be written where it will protect either of those situations, or whoever purchased those materials, as long as it's on the same job site. All right, so those are the differences between the general liability and the builder's risk policy. If you're doing rehabs, I would recommend that you do both. You buy both of those, especially now that materials over the past couple of years, even though the prices are starting to come down a little bit, it is still, the materials are still very, very expensive these days. And not being able to recover the cost of those materials could easily put you over your budget on these deals. So these policies are in addition to the already existing homeowner's policy that if you borrow money, your lender is likely going to require you to have, first of all, which you should have it anyway. I mean, the homeowner's policy is going to cover the shell. It's going to cover the property in generally. So I highly recommend that you purchase these, the general liability, or make your contractor purchase the general liability, and then also a builder's risk policy. So let's say we've done the rehab, everything's done, we're good to go, and now you are going to be renting this property out. Now we have to go out and purchase a landlord policy. I'm going to stick to rentals, because if we go down the path of the seller finance thing, although it's very, very similar, it's not hard to do. I'm going to stick to rentals on this one. Let me make sure there are a couple of different types of policies when we're talking about landlording or seller financing, which I'm not going to get too far into the seller financing part of it. And you have to make sure that you're purchasing the correct type of policy here, because if you're not, obviously the insurance company is not going to write a policy, and then let's say they're not going to write a policy for a vacant property and then cover that property if it's tenant occupied, especially if maybe there's something that the tenant's at fault with. All right, so I just gave away the secret. The two types of landlord policies, one is going to be a vacant policy. This generally applies if the house is vacant for 30 days or more. So that really all that means is, let's say that I don't know, you finished up the rehab, but it's probably going to be 30 days before you can get somebody in there, maybe longer than 30 days. If it's going to be longer than 30 days, you have to buy a vacant policy. That would also apply if maybe you have a tenant that's leaving and you need to do some repair, you got to get someone in there to do some fix up and clean up. If that's going to be vacant for longer than 30 days, make sure you have a vacant policy. And then we have our tenant occupied policy. That is exactly what it sounds like. So this would be, they may not call it tenant occupied, it's just going to be an occupied policy. And that's exactly what it sounds like. It's if you're renting the property out, or if you're seller financing, make sure that the policy that you have written is a landlord policy, and make sure that it is, if you have somebody in the property, make sure it's an occupied policy. It's going to be way cheaper as well. Insurance companies love to see properties occupied. So the major difference between these two is mainly price. A vacant policy is much more expensive than a tenant policy. And obviously there's greater risk with a vacant property. That's why we want to get our properties filled as quickly as we possibly can. But a vacant policy is going to be definitely more expensive. And also, a lot of companies, what they'll do with these landlord policies is they will require you to purchase a policy, say for 6 months or a year. But then let me give you an example. Let's say you buy a vacant policy, and it's on day 31, somebody gets that property, or you get somebody into that property. You get a tenant into that property. So you've paid for a yearly premium. So there should be some reimbursement, obviously. if you've paid for a yearly premium, but you're only using it for 30 days, there's reimbursement. Well, a lot of these insurance companies will have a minimum 3-month, 90-day reimbursement policy where they'll reimburse you everything except for that first 90 days. So it's a little bit of a scam run, I think, by the insurance companies, but that's the way that it is. So I'm sure they have a reason for it. I just don't know what that reason is. But that is, and then on the tenant occupied, generally you're looking at a liability. That we're talking about landlord policy. You're a liability of minimum of $1 million. That's generally where they start. And then what we like to do is, instead of buying a policy with all these bells and whistles and all these kind of, I guess you could call them kind of luxury items, trying to really be like these extra little things, like I'm being totally facetious here, but it could be like something special, like a flood rider or something like that, something that that you would never need in a particular area. What we like to do is we like to build policies that exclude all of the fluff and all the things that we do not need. And also we look at whether or not the property is in an area that we are personally willing to rebuild should a catastrophe happen. So, for example, if I buy a property in an area that, I'm not particularly, maybe there's not a lot of new construction, maybe it just wouldn't fit. Maybe it just wouldn't be a fit to build a brand new house in a particular area. What we'll do is we'll buy enough coverage on the building that will cover it will cover paying off any kind of mortgage that we have, any kind of underlying mortgage we might have. And then it will also cover the cost of going in and tearing that building down and completing the the tear down process. And if there's a basement, it would be removing the basement, filling the basement in, and just basically leveling that lot. And so what that allows us to do, it allows us to keep our insurance premiums really, really low. Talk to your lender. There may be a required deductible amount for these policies for we're talking about homeowners now on this landlord policy. There may be a required deductible. I know that mine is a minimum of $5,000. So I have to have at least a $5,000 deductible. And I like to keep the deductibles as high as I possibly can. So 5,000 is about as high as I can go. But if I could get away with it, I would definitely, I do 10 or something like that. And then just make sure that the coverage that I had in the end would cover even my deductible amount, if that makes sense. So our policies are written they're very, very kind of stripped down policies. They are not, they don't have all the fluff and all the silly little riders that they like to sell you on that can really add up. If you've got a portfolio, all those little riders and all those little things that you don't need can really add up. One thing I would recommend that you get with these landlord policies is the loss of income. I would pay for loss of income, and all that is it doesn't mean, a lot of people think that loss of income on these policies means that if you lose a tenant. When I first started getting into rental properties, I bought this loss of income rider on these policies, and I thought it was because I lost a tenant. Well, it's not just if you lose a tenant; it's if your property is destroyed and you lose income from that tenant being displaced. So it can help out, especially if there's this transition period. Maybe you don't have anywhere for that tenant to go, and maybe it takes 6 or 8 months or 12 months for maybe the fire marshal to come in and do all the evaluation, the investigation, and then in the meantime, you're just out that monthly cash flow. So that's what the loss of income is. It's going to protect you against. Protect you against that loss of income that you would normally have got had you had a tenant in that property. And all right, let's see here. Does anybody have anything this morning? Wow, I said I was only going to be on here for a little bit, and that's already I'm only like 25 minutes into this thing. See, you get me talking about this stuff, and I just can't shut my mouth. All right, Joshua says, how are you ensuring that your coverage covers your deductible? Okay, so let's say, now keep in mind, I can only do, I have to be at 5,000. I have to be at a minimum $5,000 deductible. I can go lower. I can do $2,500 deductible. And that's going to raise my premium. But I can only go up to $5,000. The idea is obviously that the higher your deductible, the lower your premium is going to be. So I would like to jack that up to $10,000. Well, I can't do that. So instead, what I'll do, or let me say this: if I could get it to $10,000, I would want to make sure that I purchased enough coverage to offset having to come out of my pocket with it for that $10,000. I hope that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, let me know. Let me know here in the comments. All right. I would just stick with. I mean, honestly, we just stick with 5,000. We're done with it. We get really good rates. We're using the insurance company we use is called SES Insurance. They're underwritten by Lloyd's of London and Grubb. Is it Grubb? Yeah, Grubb. It's Grubb. Sorry. Yeah. So those who we use SES. They're actually out of California. There's a company called Real Protect who's a broker for Grubb or for SES, and they're in Gainesville, Georgia. I would probably, things are changing with them quite a bit, so I would probably look local first. It's not that I don't. We've had really, really good luck with SES. We did have a major fire in one of my multifamilies, and we had no problems with it at all. I'm going to give you guys a super great tip here. If you ever have a catastrophe like this, if you ever have a fire, or you have, if you have a flood rider, if you're in a flood zone and you don't have flood insurance, you're just kind of screwed on this one. But if you ever have a major catastrophe, if you have maybe a tornado comes through, or if you're in an area that doesn't have tornadoes, maybe a typhoon or a hurricane, make sure that you hire a public adjuster on this. A public adjuster, there are 3 people that can represent you in an insurance claim. One of them is yourself, one of them is an attorney, and the other is a public adjuster. Now, I've only dealt with a public adjuster here in my home state, but I can tell you I do have friends. What I'm trying to say is I don't know all the ins and outs of that industry in other states, but I can tell you that I do have friends that have used them. I've got one in Oregon, one in DC or Virginia, and I'm telling you, it's the best money that I ever spent on, as it relates to insurance, as it relates to the topic we're talking about today, because what their sole purpose is to look at the policy that you have in place and make sure that the insurance company is following that policy to a T. And it sounds super simple. It sounds like something that you could just do. But I had never had a catastrophe like this before, and so we were offered right up front. We were offered somewhere in the range of $86,000 or $87,000 to get this property whipped back into shape and get a new unit and all that good stuff. Because it was a 4-family and only one of the units was burned. So the insurance company offered us it was like $87,000, something like that. Well, I took the advice of another investor and went ahead and hired out hired a public adjuster. Now, our public adjuster, they started at 12% on whatever they could recover. That was going to be that's their fee. If we went over, if he could have recovered over $100,000, he dropped that rate down to 10%. So we ultimately what ended up happening was, through this public adjuster and through his help, we were able to recover almost double what what the insurance company was initially offering. So we ended up recovering over $160,000 on this property. So, he, of course, I had to write him a check for his 10%. So if we deduct that cost, we still came out way, way, way ahead. It was 100%. And now I'm so glad we did, because, there are these little things, and this is what they do. There are these little things that we didn't catch. So these little things. It's hard for me to kind of remember. This was last year when this happened, last December. So it's kind of hard to remember things like, if you happen to if you have to tear into a wall, let's say, well, a lot of municipalities, a lot of cities will require that if you tear into a wall, you have to upgrade the entire building, or something along those lines. That's what they told us, was that if we, once we started removing this fire damage, now we have all of this. We have to do all these code upgrades to the property. Well, we didn't even think about that in the beginning. So the public adjuster, they just know things like that. They know they deal with insurance companies every day, and it was just not only that, but now you're hiring them. They literally take over everything. You hand them your policy. They get the police report, they get the fire marshal's report, and they literally take over everything. So it's kind of, you're just offloading additional work, because this is not something you could ever really plan for. So if you ever have, just keep this in mind, bear this in mind, try and remember this. If you ever have an issue, or if you ever have a major catastrophe like that, definitely hire that out to a public adjuster. I would highly recommend it. It was, like I said, it was the best money we ever spent. All right. Does anybody have anything they want to discuss this morning, whether it's about this topic or something totally separate? All right. Well, if nobody else has anything, I'm going to go ahead and call it this morning. Again, I'm down here in the Smoky Mountains, and we're going to go out today, and we're going to have a little fun and do some exploring and have a good time. So I appreciate everyone joining. We will catch you guys next week. All right. Take care, guys.